This program has been approved for one IDCEC CEU. To receive credit for this program, please submit your full name, IDCEC number, program class code, and your summary essay to ceu@iida.org. The program class code is located alongside the title of this program on the IIDA Academy page. For a certificate of completion to use toward another certifying body, please submit the same information to ceu@iida.org. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Akilah Halley. I am the Executive Director of Marwen, and delighted to bring this conversation to you all. We have tremendous experience and perspective on this panel, and so I'd like to begin by inviting each person to introduce themselves. And
Hi, I'm Gabrielle Bullock, Chief Diversity Officer with Perkins&Will.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Durst. I'm the Executive Vice President and CEO of IIDA, and also honored to be a Marwen board member.
Hello, I'm Vibhavari Jani. I am a professor in interior architecture and industrial design at Kansas State University.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for those introductions. We're going to, of course, explore, the current state of diversity in design professions. We're really excited to share insights into current program strategies and advocacy approaches. Looking forward to offering expertise and perspectives on effective action steps for now as well as the future. And of course, provoke further thought and conversation for some very key actionable takeaways. So I have some questions to get us started. And of course, we'll move organically through this very important topic. So we all know that diversity is still lacking in design professions. So just want to do a temperature check. Where do you feel we stand? Is there measurable progress or is there lack thereof? Gabrielle, want to get us going?
Yes, thank you, Akilah. Well, I think the Supreme Court's ruling last year, the year before, is going to have a profound impact on diverse candidates going into design school or higher ed in general. And so I think higher education institutions have to be more creative. Right? I understand essays are being used to determine those that come from a diverse cultural background and perhaps have economic status that would warrant some consideration. But I don't know that that is taking hold yet. And so I'm not an expert on that. But I do think that race-based considerations are a challenge now. And so without that cultural, that creative approach to entice and attract diverse candidates, I think we have a problem. I do think that the pushback, the current pushback, the cultural shift and pushback on JEDI and EDI in many factions of our society is also a big challenge. But I also think that being creative in how we approach diversity and equity and inclusion in our practices and in our schools has to be based on the principles that it stands for and not the acronym itself, because the acronym is being weaponized and used against us. So for instance, if the principles of JEDI of cultural competency, belonging, psychological safety are embedded in the culture of our practices in our schools, then that will get at what EDI is all about. So I'll stop there just as a preamble.
Gabrielle, I was vociferously nodding as you were saying DEI as an adjective, right? And it's when you put that in front of, when we hear people saying someone is a DEI candidate, it is a deficit. It is read as a deficit. And so when it's used that way, you said it's weaponized as opposed to a value, a guiding principle embedded in the culture of the entire organization. Akilah, you asked about, you said this was temperature taking. I feel like we're lukewarm, right? Things were hotly hot, in 2020, and everybody was engaged around an effort. I'm not sure that that firms and society in general fully understood what that effort meant, but there was an enthusiasm, there was an engagement, there was a call to action. We became activists. Many folks who had not thought about this before became activists. Things like the Supreme Court decision have had a chilling effect. Things built around the negativity and the weaponizing of DEI. There is fear-based. It is fear-based now, I think. And so it is the work of design to be inclusive. Sadly, we've had to look at changing semantics. And so we talk about belonging and inclusion as opposed to DEI because those very words have become heated. There are people who can't use DEI even on their business cards any longer. And so I think it's calling on every single one of our talents as a creative industry to continue to maintain inclusivity in thought and deed and practice.
And I agree with you, Cheryl, especially coming from the academic arena. We have direct impact of the Supreme Court decision, right? So that's not a good thing moving forward. But as optimistic as I always have been, I see challenges and then I see opportunities, and a lot of work has gone in from varieties of different perspectives, from academic arena to professional organization like IIDA and IDEC and ASID, and varieties of these organizations have actually really started looking into how do we really create this inclusive environment for students to belong, for professional designers to feel as if they are part of a larger profession and not just a very small group of people. So I actually was doing this research before this panel, and some of these organizations that came up after 2020, or some of them have started beforehand: Design Explorer, Project Osmosis, Indirect Project, E4 Youth, Innovators for Purpose, Indigenous STEM Program, Diversity in Design Collaborative. So there are varieties of now designer-based activist groups that are helping in spreading the word as well as doing the base groundwork to create that kind of positive impact, and also introduce design as a larger life-changing, for lack of better word, guiding principle for all communities, not just upper class or white communities. So that's also something that we should really celebrate. And then NCIDQ, IDEC have also now started diversity scholarships. So certification, for example, fees are a part of that scholarship. So there are varieties of different ground roots kind of initiatives that are happening too. So that is good. So we have to really just stay positive and keep moving forward. That is my personal perspective.
Right. And I just want to add, Cheryl, you talked about assets, and I've been talking recently about assets versus deficit. If we can talk about the assets, the benefit of multicultural, diverse, equitable design practices, right? It was never okay for it to be homogenous.
Right.
So can we focus on the benefit to the communities that our work impacts, the environment, the students, just well-rounded, culturally curious folks.
Yeah. And it's just better design when you consider all instead of some.
Right. And I think it would be really nice to start using the industry terms like universal design or human-centered design, or then it doesn't become one group versus the other. It really becomes thinking about people of all walks of life. And that's who we design for anyways.
But it does require all of us to be in the room.
Absolutely.
And I think that is where our industry was somewhat behind, that
Correct.
People of color weren't always in the room. Women weren't always in the room, even though design is predominantly female populated, it isn't predominantly female led. And so changing the conversation and including more folks in that room will also help change those conversations too.
And that is, I think, the crucial point, right? That participation and being there, just being at the meeting makes a difference. So showing up, and in fact, having role models make a huge difference, not only just academic, but also in profession.
Yeah. And if you aren't, go ahead, Gabrielle, sorry.
And if you're in the room, look around and say out loud, call it out, who's not in the room.
That's right.
That should be in the room.
That's right. And that's that piece that knowing that there will be allies and champions for you who will speak up for you in the places where you aren't, because we haven't always had that either.
Yeah, and I like that this is, speaking about, the asset-based language and the stance, moving away from defending it as work versus taking a stance on why it matters, because that space does create that lens of deficit, and we certainly see the tremendous brilliance that exists and the tremendous opportunity. And yes, while lukewarm, we have made some progress, but there's still tremendous strides for us to make. We don't take our foot off the gas because there is so much work to do. And as we think about creating pathways for the next generation and just this, even the current generation, this concept of pathways and pipelines, what do you think about a strategy that includes growing your own talent? Does a strategy like that work? Have you seen that work, or what are some areas of improvement that you see in that space?
Shall I start? Okay.
Sure.
I think that, one, growing within requires a unique and individualized approach to talent development and career development. We all didn't come from the same starting point, right? So the whole point around equity and retention of specifically diverse talent requires that we understand from where they came. And they're unique. Everybody has a unique path. And so I think we've applied a one size fits all largely that is not capturing or keeping diverse talent, women in our industry. So if we can focus on that, then I think we have a better chance. Because again, it goes back to belonging. I wanted to share one thing that Cheryl said about sort of mentorship. So I have been thinking a lot about sponsorship. Mm-hmm. Sponsors talk about you. Mentors talk to you, generally speaking. So if you're sponsoring, you're advocating for them proactively in meetings, in staff reviews, whatever. And that's what, that's one way to make sure that nobody falls through the cracks and that folks don't leave the firm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think another aspect is really still there is this whole lack of knowledge in general public of how design can be guiding light for all of us, right? I mean, we live with every single thing we are living with is design, but people don't see it that way. And so maybe if we reach out to parents and larger community initiatives where it speaks of what design means and how design thinking can be applied to everything, not just interior spaces or architecture or products, I think we will make a lot more, we will cover a lot more ground, because it's at that level, right, where parents are guiding the children to, which it's really surprising coming from me. But as an educator, I know that it makes a huge difference, right? Parents are guiding their children to go into certain fields, and they all want them to do well in life. And money is the main issue when it comes to selecting a career and going into certain fields. So that is where I think we should also catch them young, meaning the parents who are young in really understanding what design feels all about. That would be really another aspect of it too.
Yeah. Definitely, Vibha, not just interiors or architecture or graphic design. I think all of the creative industries suffer a little bit because we aren't looked at as a viable way to make a living. Yes. The creative pursuits are often seen as a hobby, or something that you do until something better comes along. We all know that, a living, a good living, can be made in the creative industries, in design, in interiors, in architecture. So that piece about talking to parents about what does a design education mean. We also know a design education is expensive. All education is expensive, but a design education carries with it costs for materials. There are added costs. Also, a student's time. Yeah. A design student's extracurricular life looks a little different than someone in another pursuit. We have a program at IIDA called Design Your World, specifically targeted for high school students who have been traditionally underrepresented, who come from communities traditionally underrepresented in design. And one of our goals is to help parents understand. Many of our students are first generation. So helping parents understand, what does a college career look like, or what does a 2-year program look like, understanding that not everybody's going to go to a 4-year program, but those inherent costs of a design career are there. And we should talk about them frankly. But also there's the representation piece, seeing people who look like you, happy, satisfied, and succeeding in a design career is as important in that conversation as well.
And firms have an opportunity to participate in those programs, Design Your World, and particularly professionals of color who want to bring up the next generation of them. Yeah. And so, and we all experience space. So these young people, they know how they feel in a space. So a program like Design Your World to help them see how you can impact the environment.
And every subsequent generation, but most definitely the generations that are, in high school and moving into college and into the work world, they are so incredibly visually literate. Right. That often they're teaching us more about what we do for a living. And so having that be an exchange moment, because they are really informing what their world is going to look like, or what they want their world to look like. That piece of it is incredibly important. We know that design empowers people. It gives you agency, it gives you autonomy. And those are the conversations that we need to be having, the power and the impact that comes with design, because you don't just impact yourself and your ability to have a livelihood, you're impacting, particularly as a commercial interior designer, as an architect, tens of thousands of people with the space and the places that you are creating.
Another aspect I value we're talking about that is the opposite side of it, right? In profession. And both sides of IIDA have been to, I've been in profession for a very long time and in education for a very long time. And both sides, when we are looking for people, right? The job descriptions are intimidating, and that should be tested so that everybody feels like they can belong to this organization, or they can belong to the university setting, or they can be in the design program. So that is something that really very important as well. And sometimes we don't know this, but if we don't test it, we don't know how it might seem to people who are applying. And it could be anybody, right? But that could be such a biased way of looking at our own organizations, and we don't even know how it could be perceived on the other side.
That are inherently exclusionary, that we're not necessarily aware of. That's such a great point, Vibha. Our moderator runs an incredible program, and I'd love for you, Akilah, to share with the panelists in the audience a bit about Marwen.
Sure. Thank you for that, Cheryl. Great board member there. But Marwen is essentially a 37-year-old organization that is at the center of supporting young people in their artistic skill development, life skill development, and then preparing them for pathways to creative careers, should they choose. And a lot of what we are talking about here is things that we grapple with day in and day out, is both the shift in the ideology around art and design, specifically design, as both a viable career path, but also an accessible one. We know that oftentimes, access certainly is a point of entry that people focus on, but the other piece that we speak a lot about is persistence through. So we know that young people may be at Marwen, we're introducing young people to a vast array of creative fields across the span of all different types of design. We talk about the traditional and alternate pathways to those fields. We provide internships and shadowing and workshops to connect those young people to these different fields and different people. But where we are really focused on is also looking at what is persistence through. Once they actually get to that post-secondary space, how are they staying? How are they moving through their college years, their gap years, their 2-year community college? They're directly into the workforce. And if they do land that job as a designer within a firm, are they staying? We talked about the sponsorship versus mentorship. What is the individual designer's responsibility? What's the firm's responsibility for supporting them in their retention and happiness? There is so much joy to have, but what are we doing to make sure that they are supported when we already know that they're underrepresented?
It's such a continuum. And I know that post 2020 and the murder of George Floyd and the focus on equity and inclusion and belonging, there was a rush by a lot of firms, a lot of entities, not just design firms, but a lot of entities to hire Black and brown people as if they'd never focused on it before. There was this rush to hire Black and brown people, to bring them in, but no thought about how do we retain folks? How do we help decrease loneliness and increase satisfaction? How do we focus on not just getting in the door, but staying in the room?
I think, Cheryl, that's a very good point, because if you look at well-being, right? You talked about well-being, and Akilah talked about joy. There are 7 pillars of well-being. So it's not just monetary remuneration. It's really about higher purpose and what you are contributing to the larger society. And So that higher purpose is something that part of well-being spectrum. And joy comes from also varieties of different aspects in life. So connecting that from very beginning stage of design education, and then at the other end of it, in profession, the burnout is a huge issue, both sides of it, right? Students are burned out because of, as you talked about, very different curriculum and requirements and expectations, versus other side of the profession as long hours and not as attractive salaries. And so burnout is a real issue. Loneliness, as you talked about, is a national issue, right? So how do we actually address these aspects, not in just superficial way, but really getting into that problem of why people are lonely, why there is no joy in working for what you are working for, and how can we actually create that kind of understanding and information where design profession can be very joyful. It has been for me. I know that all of you feel that. And so, in fact, if we can talk about well-being and how well-being should be looked at, not just health, but varieties, aspect of the 7 pillars of well-being. And one of them is this aspect of growth and personal growth, and how design thinking and being in design profession can bring that personal growth and happiness and joy, could be very powerful tool to really move our goal further.
And I think, at firms, certainly at Perkins&Will, we recognize that recruiting diverse talent that's just the first step. It's how do we retain them, keep them, and make sure that they feel like they belong, et cetera, et cetera. And the first part is educating ourselves. What does it mean to be the only one in the room? It makes you hyper visible, hyper uncomfortable, and depending on how uncomfortable you get, you may not want to be the only one in the room. So recognizing what it's like, recognizing that imposter syndrome when it shows up. So there's a whole series of self-education, focused education around all of these concepts, because we just can't hire diverse talent and let them swim or sink.
Right.
The other real opportunity is if you're a firm that does work that represents people in your practice. They want to work on projects that impact their communities, from their culture. And I don't care who you are. I've seen it over and over again, the amount of pride that design folks have in improving the communities from where they came. And so the attraction of that kind of work to diverse talent is just profound.
Yeah, that connection to projects is huge, Gabrielle. I saw that with your project Destination Crenshaw. I think about that. We were very deliberate and intentional with the naming of our pathway course. It's not design the world, it's design your world.
Yes.
Because you might be designing for thousands of people, but it's personal. And that, that essential feeling of you are crafting for a community. And if that community is your community, or not, it quickly becomes your community. But design is personal. And that call out, that shout out to every designer's soul when there is a project to be worked on that you have a connection to, that's a point for retention.
And many think that this can only happen in urban design when you're redeveloping communities, but it happens in interior design. It happens in office design space, hospitality design space, our own firm's design space.
Yeah, not for profits. Yeah. Yeah.
I think that this is really a great point, because this shows design as a value, right? And that is what we need to establish, because in a large sense, people think, especially interior architecture, interior design and architecture, as professions for wealthy, supporting wealthy. And it's not really true, but what is that value is what we have to really educate the general public about, because it also could be designing their smaller community-based initiatives to achieve what are their goals and how we can apply that design thinking to attain those goals. So that value of design and how much that can change everybody's life, as well as their growth, personal, professional, and community growth, would be so nice to be able to share with others.
And I just want to add one more thing, because we're talking about the diversity of the talent, but I want to stress the cultural uniqueness that we all bring. And that doesn't have to be race, right? So it's really about what culture, are we curious enough about a particular culture where we are designing and who we are engaging in that design.
So that's a great point. It's basically you're talking about culture-specific design and not the global design and everything looking the same. Yeah, that I think it's a larger professional educational aspect, right? Because even in Asia, we have to really do this cultural specific and climate specific, actually, design environments, because sometimes when we are just adopting Western models that really are not appropriate for the well-being of people.
And so sometimes detrimental.
Detrimental, exactly. Because we don't have enough resources as it is, and then you are blindly following certain models that would not make a living for somebody else, and in fact could be a huge sustainable issue. So that is really a great point, and that is another thing that we should really think about.
Yeah. So essentially we have a design opportunity within this.
Exactly.
And the design is how it works, but design can also be how something doesn't work and how something needs to be redesigned. And as we kind of think about designing the experience that this next generation of designers has, we talked a little bit about kind of the responsibility of firms and organizations and entities. What do we, if we were to flip that, you know, what would we think the next generation needs to see from us as current holders of design processes and design systems? What do they need to see from us?
First,
Cheryl?
they need to see us.
Yeah.
But I'll let Cheryl go.
No, I love that. Can you please expound on that, Gabrielle? Are we invisible? What?
I think, well, 4 people on this call are not invisible, but I think it takes more of us to proactively reach out to the next generation. We are accessible. We are there for you. We are here to make our profession better. And I often, I mean, I don't know how I stayed where I am or in the profession at all without seeing someone like me for so many years, except the fact that I love design. But I think it's much more important to the next generation that they are at a school or work in a firm that whose values align with theirs.
Yeah, I
which is
100%
broader.
Yeah. I also think that this next generation values community and connectedness. I think so many of us became, to our detriment, uncomfortable, but we took being alone as part of the path, that it's just something that we had to do, we had to suffer through. There are more of us, but I think this next generation wants to know that they have access to a network, not a safety net. I'm very deliberate about saying that, but a network. And I think it is up to so many of us to help create that network and to stay connected more frequently, more often, in more deeper, more meaningful ways. It was like when Gabrielle was talking about sponsorship, it is not a 9 to 5 thing, that being more available, it is almost a second or third full-time job for so many of us to stay connected to a lot of the folks that we are supporting and sponsoring at an early stage in their career or mid-career. I mean, sponsorship isn't limited to a demographic, to an age group. I think you need a sponsor throughout your entire career, but you can't turn that off and on. You have to be open to that continuously, and it's not easy.
It's not easy, and so this is so nice, because one of the documents I was just reading, it's actually a thesis from Miss Walker, describes our conversation in a very nice way. She has like 4 steps, which says access, exposure, opportunity, and value. If we can do this for the next generation, that would be the way to really help them out. And I thought, wow, that is so succinct and so well put. One cannot argue with that. So that is, like, in a nutshell, what we are doing and what we should be doing. And this connectedness issue is so true in so many different ways. This next generation, in fact, this generation, which is in school now, and the ones that is going to come next, both of these generations are very much into taking care of each other, taking care of themselves, staying connected and helping each other out. So they are not as competitive as generation beyond before. And that is what I'm seeing. And that is very encouraging, right? That they are there for each other. So they have understood this whole aspect of loneliness, especially during COVID time. But now they have recognized the need for staying connected. And with new technologies, although the research shows that the social platforms are actually creating loneliness, the new technologies that are coming in might be able to help us stay in connection with each other. So,
and also our own attitudes about what design is, or what a profession is. Design is not a club. Design is not a fraternity or a sorority. There is no hazing, right? And so those early years where you do need that support and that help and that sponsorship and that mentorship. The other day, I heard a designer, and referring to a younger employee as, well, I paid my dues. She's got to suffer through it. Like, this whole attitude that design is painful. We've got to set aside some of our own inherent opinions about our own professional pursuits, about our own profession. Nobody should have to suffer through or pay their dues. Like, the only dues you should be paying, honestly, are your IIDA dues. But but nobody should be, proverbially paying dues to move ahead, right? We all know there are things that we should do in our career. There are professional things we should do. But looking at someone and saying suffering through those things and then allow them to suffer through, like, we've got to change some perspectives on our own profession.
Again, it's back to assets and deficit. That sounds like such a deficit.
Yeah.
And the antithesis of building a belonging culture, right? I mean, yeah.
And I would also add to that notion of connectedness, responsiveness, because I do think that, at least, what we are also seeing at Marwen with the young people that we work with, as well as those who go on as alumni and they're continuing into their thriving adult lives, this notion of being responsive to them. We talked about presence, our presence, but also seeing their presence, hearing them, understanding them, valuing what they have to bring, and then responding to them in the ways in which they need us to. Whether it is connecting them to a person, an opportunity, a firm, a conference, anything of that nature. But that responsiveness, I think, also goes very hand in hand with that connectiveness. And then as we think about just some very actionable steps, we've talked about some things that firms can do, that we can do, as we kind of reflect on how we can begin to see the actual sea change, because we know that one initiative is not enough. We know that a few people moving things forward is not enough. We know that ultimately it's not a matter of an initiative or a program, but the fabric of the field. And that it's responsibility that everyone holds collectively. And so with that notion of how do we think about actionable steps, what are one or two things that you would advise people to do in order to advance diversity within design professions? If they had to choose one thing that they could walk away from this conversation doing today or tomorrow, what would you advise them to do?
I would advise them to look at their stated values, mission, and overarching strategy, and see where it may misalign or not align with what it takes to have a culturally rich, which means culturally responsive, diverse talent pool and team that is well prepared, well suited, and again, I just keep saying culturally rich, to tackle the design problems of today that every firm is facing. Our clients are facing the same. That you could ask them the same question. And I think if we can just think about it in terms of our people, our culture, the work, and the business, and what's not in the formula currently at your organization.
Yeah, that's, Gabrielle, that ties in so nicely with look around the room. Who's in the room, who's not in the room. Somebody might be sitting in the hallway that should be in the room, right? You may already have who you need in the room. Figure out why they haven't been asked to be in that room or on that project or sitting on that podium and being a spokesperson, a brand champion for the firm. And so I think it also requires we all take a good, long, hard look at some status quo, right? And don't be fooled by that's the way we've always done it. That's the tradition. Ask the questions. I think we can just, right? This is a profession that asks the best questions.
Yes.
We don't always ask them of ourselves. We ask them of our clients. But I think we need to turn some of those questions back onto ourselves.
And speaking of don't do it the same old way, on a recent pursuit, there was a young designer, fresh out of school, on the pursuit. And when it came time to decide who was going to the interview, and I made a really strong challenge to the team. I said, he should go. He has a story. He has a connection to this community because it's where he came from. And can I tell you that that young man knocked it out of the park because he was authentic. It was a story that connected to this client, this community. But back in the day, oh no designer one goes to an interview, right? Those days are over.
Yeah. So,
or should be over.
I agree. So we have been talking about this whole aspect of awareness, right? And creating awareness about who should be there, why they should be there, and then application of how we should get there. So I think I talked about this is because I come from academic background and I am at the university. I think getting them young and creating that awareness on both sides of the aisle, from the student's perspective as well as parents' perspective, would be very important. There could be varieties of different things we can do using the new technology available. So for example, one of the ideas that our Women in Design group actually has taken forward is do a traveling exhibition of women designers. And that is so huge because in history, especially in design history, we are only talking about, even today, male designers and male architects who have made all these differences. But we don't talk about a large portion of that work has been either designed by or even managed by women designers. So that kind of awareness could be, although this is traveling exhibition, that could be actually a digital exhibition that can run on varieties of these different IIDA, IDEC, and varieties of design organizational websites. We can, and then application-wise, we can offer, like we offer summer camps for the students who are interested in design. Maybe we should also think about offering design camps for parents and what design can do, because they are the first stage of selection of the profession. Maybe that would be something that would be really very important, because we have been doing these pipeline projects. I have been working with varieties of school districts to introduce design thinking and bringing them to the university and showing our facilities and really making them aware of what design means to them, and let them design a project of their liking so that they can apply this design thinking process to their project. And it could be anything. It does not have to be interior design or interior architecture or product design or furniture design. And we see such huge innovation coming out of these young generation of designers, right? Which they are not yet technically designers, but they are innovative and creative. So how do we really create that kind of design as innovation and not just design of environment or product or furniture? It's like a product-based aspect. That would be really great.
Also, when you have that opportunity, whether Gabrielle sponsors you and gets you into that room, into that presentation, or you kick the door open and you bring in your own chair into that room, don't squander the opportunity. Leverage it, use it, talk about it, put it in your portfolio and on your resume, and then bring somebody else in. But that's the other thing, is don't ever waste the opportunity you have when you're in a room you haven't previously been in, or in a conversation or on a project, whatever our metaphor is. But don't waste those opportunities.
That's actually a great advice. I will take that and use it with my students.
Run with it.
Are you going to go kick a door open?
Kick a door open.
Drag in a chair?
Yes.
I have this visual though.
I'm going to draw a cartoon.
Well, and I absolutely love that visual of someone charting their own path no matter what. It's that taking that firm stance on what they believe in and making their presence and ideas known and heard. And I think about a lot of the ways in which actionable steps, people also look at kind of a framework of like, what do you start, stop, and continue doing as that moment of self-reflection or organizational reflection or company-wide reflection, and this notion of, you stop speaking in that deficit lens and stop defending, taking that defense stance, and start speaking more in that asset-based space and seeing yourself and charting that path for that future that you want to see. And then the continuing to make those connections, and continuing from a nonprofit standpoint, continuing to ask for the funding, for the support to make the programs happen and to grow them so that they remain thriving, especially when you think about sustainable paths for young people, for people regardless of where they are in their careers. That sustainable funding is what creates the sustainable path. And it's not just a temporary monetary support, but it is sustainable in order for all of these ideas to move forward. And kind of thinking about the ideas that we have shared and the, rainbow in the sky. It's a little gloomy here in Chicago right now, but the rainbow in the sky metaphorically. If we were to move all of these ideas forward and people and organizations and firms were to stand in these truths that we know that they can stand in, what do you think is on the other side there? Can you share a little bit about what that future vision looks like if we were to achieve these things?
It's not lukewarm.
Red hot.
That's right.
Great rainbow to chase.
No, go ahead, Cheryl.
Yeah, no, it's vibrant. It's all the things we know that design can be. Like, design will live up to its fullest extent, but it's vibrant, it's thought-provoking. It is better, quite simply, for everybody when there's diversity of thought and point of view and all the things that we talked about in the room. It just creates a better opportunity. There's an economic imperative, right? We know all those studies that have proven that companies who invest in equity, diversity, and inclusion perform better. So it's better in all of those metrics that matter from a business standpoint, organizationally, but also the metrics that matter to us personally. I so appreciated Vibha's comment on emotional well-being. So we get organizational well-being and emotional well-being, but it's stronger and healthier for all of us.
So if I steal a line from that wonderful song, what a wonderful world it would be, right? If we really follow, as Akilah said, all these aspects that we discussed, it would be a better world for everybody. Mm-hmm. And why wouldn't we want that? Where everybody progresses, everybody is joyful, everybody is connected, everybody is working towards assisting everybody else and rising everybody together, right? That would be such a wonderful world. So I'm all for it. I have always chased butterflies and rainbows, and that would be the really wonderful thing to do. And I think it's not a pipe dream. It's actually really possible. I know there are setbacks, and setbacks come in everybody's life. So this is in our community of designers' lives that we are experiencing a little bit of setback. But I always like to end it on a positive note that we have to remember that women did not vote, did not have the right to vote not too long ago. And from there to now, we have really gained a lot of ground and made a lot of progress. And we just have to be optimistic and go forward with this wonderful ideas and start working together to implement it. And then it would be a wonderful world. Who wouldn't want that?
I'm going to go back to 2020. The excitement, whether by fear, sense of urgency, there was an excitement about advancing, changing, evolving our profession, our society. What I wish for and hope for is that that excitement comes back and is sustained in a mindset, and that it's not just a moment. Don't even want to call it a movement. It's a mindset, because if we've not cracked the code yet, right? So there's still work to do. So if we can, forget about the weaponization of that acronym, what do we want our future to be? What do we want to be the change that we want to see? And I think we do.
I agree. And that's a wonderful, I come from India, and that is quote that Gandhi is very famous for. And I really believe in it. I have lived that because my parents are Gandhians. My mother just passed away, but my father is still alive. And he has always taught both of us, me and my brother, that you do the work you want to make others do, right? Like you be the change you want to be, you want to see. And that's such a great way to look at our particular aspect here that we are talking about. And I think one thing we have to really talk about is staying positive, staying hopeful, staying loving and caring, and helping each other out, because there is time and place for everything. But this young generation needs some support. They have the drive, they have the willingness to really do work together, but they may not have all the tools together yet. And if we can provide them those tools and this growth mindset, which I would now change to diversity mindset, as you talked about, Gabrielle, that would really change the way we do business, change the way we teach, change the way we work together, and change the way we live life. That would be wonderful.
That word change, design is change, right? That is an inherent
Absolutely.
part of design, and design is joy, and design is optimism. This is not hard for this profession because we embrace everything that it stands for.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Gabrielle, Cheryl, and Vibha. I really appreciate all of the contributions and this shared space with the three of you. The diversity mindset is very powerful, and design is how it works and how we get there. Design is resilient. This has just been an incredible time with you all, and as we wrap up, I will also invite you all to share any final words that you may have about the work that we all already see happening and the future that we're already part of. Cheryl, would you like to go?
Sure. I think it is, I think we use the word access a number of times. I think it's being open to all that our profession brings us, to all that humanity brings us. I have said for a very long time that I have been in this business, be of the world. You can't design for the world unless you are of the world. So be of this world and understand, that the world has access to you. You are crafting and creating space and place and experience for the world, but you can't do that if you're not of the world.
And to follow on, to be of the world, you must be curious and see it and diversity as an asset. And it's a deficit if you're not.
And I would say, think of design as the power to bring joy, to bring connectedness, to bring empowerment. And so if we really think about access, if we really think about exposure, if we really think about the opportunity that can be, we can really progress so much more and so much faster. So be the part of the world, be the designer of the world, but also be inclusive of, and be proud of where you come from. And do think about culturally specific design solutions, climatic specific design solutions, so that it's not do all for be all, and really generate solutions for all. Really celebrate the diversity in your thinking, in your cultures, in your way of life, in your human connections, and really support it. What more can we ask for?
Beautiful. Thank you all. And thank you everyone who's joining us as well.